We continue, of course, to bring you some reaction following the resignation of Johannesburg's executive mayor, Kabelo Gwamanda. And, of course, calls for his resignation had recently intensified. Let's bring in some analysis on these developments. We're joined now by Tessa of Rivonia Circle. Tessa, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Kabelo Gwamanda is one of the only two Al-Jama councillors in the city, with the other being Tapelo Ahmed, only lasting 3 months as Joburg mayor. What should we make of a move like this?
Well, I think that what's important about this is that as the residents of Johannesburg, the only thing that we can do when we are dissatisfied with the state of the city is call for political accountability. We don't have a say on who the municipal manager is. We don't have a say on who runs the different entities in the city. We don't hire and fire at that level. But as residents, we hire and fire the politicians that serve us. And so when we made the call for the mayor to resign as the Joburg Crisis Alliance, we didn't make that call because of Mayor Gwamanda and his personal capacity. We made that call because of political accountability begins and ends with the mayor. The mayor puts in place the mayoral committee, and when the council, whose job it is to hold the mayor and the mayoral committee, don't do their job, we have to then force their hand and show that political accountability is something that can still be exercised in the city and in this country. It cannot just be that at the whim of political parties, when they feel that it is in their best interest that a mayor gets removed or a motion of no confidence is passed, that they do so. We have to have a voice as the residents, and we think that it's important that we can show that we can put the kind of pressure that has political parties reconsidering their coalition agreements and reconsidering who is at the helm of the city and who's in the mayoral committee.
Yeah, and in exerting that pressure and forcing their hand, essentially, what were some of the loopholes that really stood out when you assessed the impact of Gwamanda's performance in a city like Johannesburg?
Well, I think it's not just Mayor Gwamanda's performance. It has been a series of just bad management and bad decision-making by politicians through the kinds of coalitions that have been set up in the last 5 years minimum. We've just not seen, number one, coalition agreements that have a clear plan of action, a clear, in this case with the city of Joburg, given the levels of crisis that we have, a clear turnaround strategy that is needed, and a clear accountability plan. What is very unfortunate in South Africa as we stand now is that even though at local government level we get to elect our councillors as ward councillors from our communities, they often, more often than not, in fact, take their political instructions from their parties rather than from their communities. Yeah. They take their mandates and their marching orders from political bosses. And so what we've seen is a lack of accountability coming from council, because the parties, and it's not just Mayor Gwamanda and Al-Jama in this case, I think one of the things we've overlooked in the last year is the extent to which the bigger parties that are part of this coalition, like the ANC, like the EFF, have been able to avoid political accountability as they stand in the shadows of Mayor Gwamanda, who they have empowered through their votes and deal-making to have the kind of responsibility that he has, and they are part of that mayoral committee. I mean, we're talking about potentially having Dada Morero as the next incoming mayor, yeah, as proposed by the ANC, if he was in charge of the finances of the city under Gwamanda's watch. And the finances are a big part of the concern that we have with the crisis of the city, in terms of underspending, in terms of the city clearly not having enough resources, needing loans. There's so many questions to be answered around the finances of the city as well. And so this must, you know, the ANC uses the term collective responsibility. Mm-hmm. They too must take collective responsibility for the actions of this mayor and this mayoral committee, and the kind of response that needs to come with incoming mayor, whether it's from the ANC or any other party, is a council that is willing to hold the mayor and the mayoral committee to a plan and to accountability. Otherwise, the residents will continue to have to put this pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. You're quite correct. The ANC is likely to back current finance MMC Dada Morero to replace Gwamanda. Of course, we know that Morero has already had a taste of the mayoral office, although it was 25 days. what kind of leadership do you require from him? You've said quite a bit about accountability being at the forefront of whatever responsibilities are at hand and whatever he's tasked with. But what kind of leadership do you look for?
Well, as we've engaged along with other civil society and community-based groups, there are definitely some very pressing issues on the table when it comes to the city of Joburg. The first being the electricity crisis. While Eskom is saying that it's got an oversupply of electricity, the distribution in the city of Joburg is now being met with load reduction and communities going days and days without electricity. So there needs to be a plan to address the electricity crisis and the load reduction crisis. But that has also been overlaid by a tariff that has been put in place by this council, not just by this mayor, but was voted in by this council, a tariff that was not sufficiently engaged on in the community, and a tariff that is giving a serious problem to particularly the most vulnerable people in our city at the moment. And so re-looking at those tariffs and coming up with an electricity plan, I think, is important. The effects that has had on water, but also just generally the state of an entity like Joburg Water needs to be looked at. And I think that we really have a chronic issue in the city of a number of the city's entities simply being either dysfunctional or underperforming, not having the right kind of management, having bloated boards, but very little outcomes for it. I think that between the water and the electricity crisis, there are some real easy wins that this new administration can look at, but they also need to do a proper audit of every entity and make sure that we are actually getting value for the kind of resources that we are spending on boards, on management, on managers that are underperforming, and on entities that are simply dysfunctional. We need an audit of that, and we need a turnaround strategy for the city. One of the things that has come out this year, and this has been a recurring problem but has grown, has been the underspending of this administration when it comes to infrastructure and capex. The National Treasury this year actually pointed out that the city of Joburg, with its national grant, was underspending to over 40% of what it was given as a dispersion. So we really need a real turnaround strategy around some of the key service delivery challenges. We need to have a sense that the entities are being managed correctly, that there's spending in the city that is correct, and that the indigent and the poorest people in this city are being catered to, being looked after, being heard. I think if we have a turnaround strategy, that would be a very, very big step forward, one that has a time frame, one that has milestones, and one that councillors are willing to hold this executive to account on.
Yeah. What does the underspending, do you think, signify about the kind of internal issues that still need to be resolved and the clear strategies that are needed inside? Because as you and I speak, Morero is set to become the city's 10th executive mayor since the 2016 local government elections.
Well, it simply speaks to a lack of a coherent plan. And this has been one of the problems with coalitions in South Africa in general, is that we've had coalition governments that have come together around expediency in terms of people getting positions, but it hasn't necessarily held a coalition to a plan of action that is executable and that can be executed. I think there's also been a management crisis, and that management crisis is twofold. One is that there's been a high degree of politicization of the state bureaucracy, which means that anytime you have politicians that are from a different background from what bureaucrats are used to, then you have a stalling of the system. You have lots of internal game playing that happens within the bureaucracy, and you also have high levels of corruption, high levels of maladministration that is covered up. And so you don't get to the bottom of when things are going wrong. We cannot also underestimate the role that corruption has played in the city of Johannesburg. We talk a lot about things like construction mafias. We have serious crises when it comes to the property agency, for example, in the city of Joburg, the properties that are owned, the hijacking of buildings, all of those kinds of things. There are criminal syndicates that are also part of the story of the city of Joburg at the moment that needs to be needs to be dealt with. But overall, the management of an execution of a plan of action, of a turnaround strategy where there's political will to get things done, and things are not only done when it is convenient for politicians, is absolutely essential. But I will also say that I think this is a time for us to do a clarion call to councillors. We must remember that ward councillors make up the majority of that council. The PR councillors are in a minority in that council. And what we need to ask is for our ward councillors to step up and to start representing us as communities and not taking their marching orders from their political bosses, so that we get feedback on the budgets that are set up, whether those budgets are being spent, why there's underspending. We need to be able to call our councillors to come and account for us, ward by ward, street by street, community by community. At this point, I would want the City of Joburg councillors not just to be huddled up around their political leaders this week and hearing what is said to them, but asking of their different communities what they believe is best, making a case for the kinds of people that they are going to put forward and they are willing to vote for, because those councillors work for us as the residents. They do not work for their political parties, and it's time that they start realizing that.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us there, and that very thorough analysis there, giving us some insight, Tessa Dooms of Rivonia Circle, following the resignation of the Executive Mayor of the City of Johannesburg, Kabelo Gwamanda.